Rebuilding is hard on a football franchise, as it requires a lot of patience in deciding on future decisions. Rebuilding is a time where a team will go through rough patches and struggles, a time where little light can be seen at the end of the tunnel. Rebuilding can also be flat out embarrassing, as was the case with Zach Wilson, and as was the case with the 1973 San Diego Chargers. In the beginning of the 1960s, the San Diego Chargers accumulated a great deal of success, appearing in 5 AFL championships, winning one in 1963 where they defeated the Boston Patriots by a score of 51-10. They were coached by Hall of Fame coach Sid Gillman and led by stars such as Lance Allworth, Ron Mix, and John Hadle. After reaching the playoffs in 1965 where they lost to the Buffalo Bills, the Chargers would not see another playoff for 14 years, losing in the first round of the 1979 playoffs to the Houston Oilers. After failing to reach the playoffs 4 years in a row, the San Diego Chargers decided to move away from longtime coach Sid Gillman and replace him with Charlie Waller more than halfway into the 1969 NFL season. During Waller's short reign, which ended at the conclusion of the 1970 season, he compiled a record of 9-7-3, failing to reach the playoffs. Heading into the 1971 season, the Chargers began rebuilding their team in an effort to return to their former glory. During this time, they lost star receiver Lance Allworth, but on the upside found a coach they were comfortable in, with former Redskins defensive coordinator Harlan Safari. Although Coach Safari only compiled a record of 4-9-1 in 1972, the Chargers signed him to a 5-year contract, extending him through the 1977 season. After only winning 4 games in 1972, the Chargers were still in a rebuilding phase and were desperate to find the right pieces to make their team work. Like many teams, the Chargers eyed draft night as a hopeful portal into success. With the 25th pick of the 1973 NFL Draft, the San Diego Chargers drafted Heisman Award winner Johnny Rodgers, a running back/kick returner out of Nebraska. Rodgers was not the answer the Chargers were looking for and brought little to no value to not only the Chargers but to professional football. In his 2 years in the Chargers organization, Rodgers had 49 rushing yards, 599 return yards, and 0 touchdowns. Without a doubt, Rodgers was not a great pick for the Chargers and was certainly not the only talent they had to choose from. Right after the Chargers picked Rodgers at 25th overall, the Bills picked future Hall of Fame offensive lineman Joe DeLamielleure. Outside of the draft, the Chargers thought it would be a benefit to their team if they brought in experienced veterans to tutor their hopeful and upcoming stars. Their biggest acquisition in the 1973 offseason was legendary quarterback Johnny Unitas, who was brought in to mentor third-round draft pick Dan Fouts. To begin the 1973 season, the San Diego Chargers took on the Washington Redskins in Washington, D.C. on September 16th. The Chargers' first game set very low expectations for the season after they were defeated by a score of 38-0. Unitas finished the game with only 55 yards while throwing for 3 interceptions. In Week 2 of the 1973 season, the Chargers took on the Buffalo Bills at home, hopeful to revert the damage that had occurred the week before. This time the Chargers bounced back, with Unitas throwing for 2 touchdowns, Robert Holmes rushing in for 2, and Ron Smith scoring on a 72-yard punt return. All this led the Chargers to beat the Bills by a score of 34-7. By Week 3, the Chargers remained hopeful as they took on the Cincinnati Bengals at Three Rivers Stadium. After going up 3-0 early in the first quarter, Ken Anderson and the Bengals came back, while Unitas and the Chargers struggled. Unitas would throw for 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions as the Bengals defeated the Chargers by a score of 20-13. In Week 4 of the 1973 season, Johnny Unitas and the Chargers took on the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh. It was a special game for Unitas, as he had never played the Pittsburgh Steelers before in his 18-year career, while also being a native of the city. The game couldn't have gone worse for Unitas, however, as he was benched after completing 2 of 9 passes for 19 yards and 2 interceptions. After Unitas was benched, rookie Dan Fouts came in. That would be the last game 40-year-old Unitas would ever start. Despite Dan Fouts going on to have a Hall of Fame career, his rookie year was all but noteworthy. He did not win a single game for the Chargers and would be the quarterback for blowout losses, including a 41-0 loss to the Atlanta Falcons, a 33-6 loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, and a 31-3 loss to the Oakland Raiders. The Chargers would finish the season 2-11-1, with quarterback Wayne Clark winning 1 game. Head coach Harlan Safari would step down after a Week 8 loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, a game where his team didn't score a single point. After leaving the game to go home, Safari would find that his tires had been slashed by frustrated fans. The 1973 Nightmare season was a low point in Chargers history and a season they certainly want to forget about. Many factors contributed to the Chargers performing so poorly, from a bad draft, replacing their franchise quarterback with a washed-up 40-year-old, and keeping faith in a coach that had little to no past success. Out of all of these factors, perhaps none are quite as severe as the drug abuse that had occurred throughout the season. For many years prior to the 1973 season, the San Diego Chargers training staff had been giving their players high doses of steroids and amphetamines to play through injuries. Nine-time Pro Bowler Walt Sweeney recounted that taking speed was as much a part of his pregame preparation as putting on pads. Players were so overcome by the drugs that they were taking that they continued to play with serious injuries, sometimes to the point of sacrificing their careers. In 1969, defensive lineman Houston Ridge broke his hip during a game and remained on the field not knowing how badly he was injured. 1969 would be his last season. After Houston Ridge sued the Chargers in 1972, Chargers owner Gene Klein hired a team psychiatrist, Dr. Mandel, to talk with players and find out how common drugs were being used. Dr. Mandel turned out to be a shady doctor, and after finding out that players were frequently using drugs, he began prescribing them even more prescription pills. By week 3 of the 1973 season, owner Gene Klein decided that he had had enough and stormed into the Chargers locker room screaming that drugs were ruining his team. He even went as far as hiring wire-wearing hookers to find out who was taking drugs. After becoming increasingly frustrated, Klein contacted Commissioner Pete Rozelle to combat the problem. Rozelle hired private investigators to investigate the situation and quickly solve the problem. At the end of the 1973 season, 8 players were fined and suspended by the league. Coach Shavari was fined $5,000 and Gene Klein was fined $20,000. All the fined players were traded from San Diego. The 1973 Chargers had a nightmare season, a season that everyone can look upon and learn from. If you want to learn even deeper into the story, Dr. Mandel, the team psychiatrist, published a book in 1976 titled Nightmare Season on all the things he witnessed while working with the team. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, bye for now.